When I first started, I was of the typical mindset of a landlord that why make anything too nice because your tenants are just going to bust it up. I did not put a lot into them. Therefore, I got the tenant I was asking for. I got bad tenants.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 48. My guest today specializes in buying, restoring, and renting historic homes in downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan. John Potter is the president of Tanglewood Properties, and he's a realtor with Pro Real Estate Services. He's also a board member of the RPOA. John also shares a very surprising and unexpected connection to the historic homes that he's so passionate about. John, thanks a lot for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we just start with you telling me a little bit about yourself and why you invest in real estate?
Well, it came about kind of as a surprise. I was working in industrial management for many years, transferred to Grand Rapids here for a job. Company didn't make it after a couple of years, got sold by the company I came here with and lost a lot of big customers. So I was kind of forced to try to find a new job here or elsewhere or try something new. And my wife and I, we really loved Grand Rapids and we wanted to make the decision to stay here. So I really couldn't find a job in my business. And my hobby up to that time had always been working on and improving my own homes that we've owned over the years. And that was my hobby, my fun. So I thought maybe I could make that into a career or at least a worthwhile opportunity. And so I bought a property. We took out a second mortgage on the house, bought a property to flip, did it successfully, and then just got the bug, just got rolling. We flipped a large number of properties. We focused mostly in the historic neighborhoods in Grand Rapids. A lot up and down Fuller, a lot of great homes in there, a lot in the neighborhoods around Heritage Hill. And we were up to doing 3-4 a year, had a small crew, and we were cranking them out. Started to notice some of my previous sales. My buyers usually became my friends also. And talking with some of them that had bought a house, they would sell one of my homes that I'd renovated for them for quite a bit more than I made on the property renovating it. And I kind of thinking, wow, these property values are just increasing. Why am I giving away like a good opportunity? Maybe I should hold on to some. So I got into kind of a flip one, hold one mode for a while. And then as things really got heated up in 03, 04, 05, I was just basically holding everything and looking for prime, what I thought could be future rental properties in Grand Rapids. And, on the side, did some contracting. We've done some new home construction. And I've been a realtor for a good number of years, and I just did that to kind of complement my investment business. But it's turned into a nice little side business for me with working with investors or first-time home buyers, especially my tenants. I like to try to be able to help my tenants when they move on to their first home after renting from me.
So was this around 1998 that your job went away?
Yep.
And you're figuring out, what am I going to do next? And you decided not to go after another job, but to just start flipping homes. How'd you come up with the cash to do that?
Well, I had been pretty good at saving money. My wife and I were always pretty good about trying to buy homes at a good price, then fixing them up and taking advantage of that. So we had a lot of room in our mortgage to take on a second mortgage. That's basically how I did the first one. I tried not to touch any of my retirement savings. So did that on the first one, sold it, then started talking to banks. When I first started out, no bank wanted to work with me. They just kind of laughed at me because I had no experience and no track record. After the first one, it became much easier. And I talked to a couple banks, ended up working with one that we became very good partners, and they were just basically underwriting anything I wanted to do, and we were rolling.
Great. So through flipping, were you able to generate enough income to replace the income you had lost from your job?
Well, I guess the way I would have looked at it was I didn't make a ton of money. If you're making, you hear about the seminars where people are making whatever crazy amount of money. I mean, I basically was shooting for 15 to 25,000 a property, so not real.
So if you
big money.
If you were getting 15 to 25,000 a property and you were doing 3 or 4 a year, that could be $60,000 to $100,000.
Yeah, I guess it would. I looked a lot of it in flipping. Yeah, as I got into holding, then it became harder to do it, and then you start looking more at your equity as maybe some income also.
All right. You don't realize. Well, explain that, because if you're the difference with flipping is you realize that equity as soon as you sell it.
Yeah, immediately.
Of course, if you're buying and holding, that equity is just it's on paper until you sell or do a cash out refi. So, how did you see that equity as part of your income?
Well, I'm not going to make as much money. I mean, back in the day, if you were investing before 2006, it was a different banking environment. You could do almost anything with a bank. Banks would give you, 105% loans. So if you wanted to get really silly, you could leverage yourself out to the hilt. I tried to be more reasonable about it. My target was always to have 67% loan to value as an 2/3 loan, 1/3 equity. That was always my goal. That way I figured any kind of a downturn, I should be safe. Then at the same time, I also wanted to make a little money. So if I could buy a property for, say $40,000, put maybe 30 into it, it might appraise for 130, because in those days, appraisals were silly. You could just tell the appraiser what you were shooting for, and
this was in the early days of the bubble, and you could
in
get away with a lot.
2004, 5, 6. So if I could walk away with $15,000 or $20,000 cash out refinance and still maintain a 67% LTV, that looked pretty good to me.
Yeah, you don't get better than that, do you?
Nope, and that's what we were doing.
And then were you cash flowing on these properties?
Yeah, ideally I was. To be honest, at that time, I really wasn't paying as close attention to cash flow as I should have. I was so busy renovating homes that I probably let a lot of cash just fall to the ground. I wasn't paying attention a lot of times. Didn't have as good a quality of tenants as I do now. Things were just a little dicier. I tended to buy my homes in areas that I thought were prime for getting better in terms of value over the years.
Areas that you saw as growth areas.
That was might
be somewhat beaten down, but on the upswing.
Yeah, I came from Chicago. I watched some of the cool old neighborhoods near downtown Chicago become highly popular again. People getting tired of the big commute, living way out and taking a train in for an hour and 20 minutes or driving for an hour and a half, back when you actually could drive the expressways into town from the suburbs. You can't do that anymore. But just watch that. I always wished I could have done that, talked about it back then, never did. And then came to Grand Rapids, and we've got like just a smaller version of Chicago happening here in terms of some of these great old neighborhoods and homes that have just not been taken care of since, probably 60s and 70s when so much changeover happened. And it's just crazy that everybody moved to the suburbs and left all these great homes kind of laying here to be picked up. And, it was happening at a slow pace in late 90s. Of course, it's a lot bigger now, but that was always my thing, trying to figure out where the next direction of neighborhoods were moving in. What were going to be the new hot neighborhoods? Heritage Hill was already established. I never have bought anything there. I've always worked on the outskirts of it.
Well, let's talk about that, because you really seem to have a passion for the historic neighborhoods. Just like you described, near downtown, walkable to downtown, 100 years or older, it seems like a lot of your properties are. Tell us about the neighborhoods that you invest in and why you feel the way you do about them.
Well, a lot of neighborhoods, Heritage Hill has definite boundaries, but sometimes you cross some borders of Heritage Hill and you're walking into neighborhoods that are just as good or just marginally less in quality of homes than Heritage Hill was. Now, of course, they were always historical for, several decades.
Yeah, and designated historic. And not just historic homes because they're old, but designated.
Yeah.
So it's a very particular thing.
And that's the point I was making. Once you've a historical district, of course, your renovations get a lot more expensive, and you tend to become much more owner occupied as opposed to landlord centric. And the neighborhoods outside of Heritage Hill were always very rental oriented. So the neighborhoods weren't as strong. But I mean, if you think back, I mean, I remember very well when Wealthy was desolate from well, even before Union, say from College all the way to, like Benjamin, or even further. I mean, the corner of Wealthy and Fuller was a crime-ridden, they were selling drugs out of that little corner store right there on the thing, right there. You pull up and somebody'd walk up to your car in daylight. It was crazy. So, but there was a lot of neighborhoods, say in Easttown on the fringes. I've always been involved a lot in South Hill, which is just the little neighborhood right south of Heritage Hill. And some Northwest Side properties that are not really College, but more out towards the Stockbridge neighborhood area over there. I always thought they had great potential, really close to downtown. Everything I've ever owned has always been pretty much a mile and a half or less to downtown, and because I wanted the proximity value. Because if downtown was going to expand, then things were just going to get swallowed up eventually. And it's been happening more and more.
Yeah, so you put your money and you placed your bets on those historic neighborhoods, thinking that they were going to be like the neighborhoods you saw in Chicago, where all of a sudden they kind of become gentrified, more people, the crime goes away, more respectable residents move in. How did that bet work out? Was the timing right for you, or did it take a little bit longer than you thought it would?
Well, if I started in 98, 99, that was perfect time to start. That would have been not quite as good as starting in, say, 2008 recently, but it was pretty good. You weren't finding the rock bottom prices that you did after the recession hit, but you could still find some good prices if you bought the worst house on what you thought was a street that was prime for improving.
As far as timing goes, were you right, or did it take a little bit longer?
98, 99, 2000, great time to buy homes. 2001 to 2003, heating up, people starting to get on board. 2004, 5, 6, it was just crazy. Everybody was doing it. Everybody, anybody that ever found out that I renovated homes and flipped homes and owned rentals, they were fascinated. Everyone wanted to do it themselves, and a lot of people jumped into it. So it was a great time. Of course, I was buying hot and heavy through 2004, 5, and 6. So I got a lot of good priced homes, and I paid too much for some homes too. I probably was over investing at the end. I was fixing up to maybe a higher tenant than I had at the particular time, with the hopes that it would happen just because it seemed to be. So yeah, it was a mix. Have some great properties that were great deals, and some that I put a lot of money into, and then I could have bought the house next door for 20% down, pennies on the dollar after the crash hit.
After the crash, yeah.
Yeah, for what I put into it, if I had a house that appraised at 185 and I had 110 into it, and the house next door goes up, the side-by-side duplex, which is what I prefer, next to my side-by-side duplex, went up for sale. Very little needed to be done to it for $17,000. It kind of knocks the equity out of my nice $185,000 appraisal that I had 3 years earlier than that, or 2 years earlier. So it was the best of times and the worst of times.
I want to get into those times, because obviously the bubble was a kind of a defining moment for a lot of investors. But before we do, I want to talk about just, you like the historic neighborhoods, and we've talked a little bit about those. What about the houses themselves, the properties you were buying? I mean, you seem to have a passion for the historic older homes. What is it about them that you like?
Well, I grew up in a neighborhood in Chicago called Morgan Park, which is very similar to a lot of the neighborhoods around Heritage Hill. It wasn't Heritage Hill, but it was very much like an Easttown or a Wealthy Street neighborhood, South Hill, anything like that. That's the kind of neighborhood I grew up in. The house I grew up in, we found out after my mother eventually sold it, the guy that bought it did some research, and he found out that it was one of the only surviving Sears kit-built homes that you could buy from the Sears catalog. Great old home, 1875 or so. Probably had about 2,200 square feet. It wasn't fancy, but very elegant. So I always loved that kind of house. We did a lot of work on that house over the years.
It was Sears kit-built homes. You mean like a catalog home? You order it through the Sears catalog?
Yeah, buy it from the Sears catalog. They deliver. Trucks would bring your house, everything that you needed on trucks to the site, and then they would build it. Your contractor would build it.
Wow.
So it eventually became the first house in Chicago to be registered as a Chicago historical home, which, if you're talking about Chicago, that's pretty amazing because Chicago is chock full of amazing, amazing homes.
So the house you grew up in was the first historic home in Chicago.
It was a budding new program by who was that? Was probably late second Mayor Daley, and it's a big time thing now.
But this was after you had grown up in it. And
we had been long gone. The guy that redid it did a fabulous job redoing that home. Funny story was my brother used to always go back there and bug him, wanted to take a look at what was happening because he was doing it. He was stripping down all the paint. He was redoing everything, sanding all the floor, stuff that we never did. And my brother went in there one time and knocked on the door. The guy comes out in kind of a lather. He said, "Hey, it's me again." "Oh yeah, great. What do you want? What's going on? How's the house going?" "Oh, it's great, but I want to know who the heck put all these layers of paint on all this trim that I've got to take off now." And my brother just said, "Well, that would have been my dad." once a year or two, whether it needed or not, got another coat of paint on it. So, but he took that all off and made a great house of it. So I always loved that kind of stuff.
What do you remember from living in that house? I mean, what was it like living in a Sears kit-built house?
It was a great house. There was nothing really special about it. My neighborhood was filled with late 1800s homes. It's a great neighborhood if you ever get a chance to research Morgan Park, Beverly. Great place to grow up. Couldn't have had a better place to grow up. And my house was nothing special. We didn't have a ton of money growing up. It started out, my grandmother bought it with my father, and she lived upstairs. We lived downstairs. It really wasn't a two-family, but they made it work. And she lived there for many years till she passed. And then we took over the house, and we just had all sorts of room for 3 kids and my parents. Great house. We could have our own bedroom and switch them every year or two. We'd, just a great old house with all the nooks and crannies to play and hide in.
And the quality of the construction, I mean, how would you compare it to the houses you own now?
Similar. It was just a plan bought from Sears, and but I think things were a lot. I don't think zoning was near like it is today back then. So you could build a lot of bad homes, but builders had pride in what they were doing. And as long as the materials were fine, which they would have been from Sears. Sears was a fantastic company back then. It was up to the builder to build a good home. And it was a great home. It was 125 years old. When we finally, I think, sold it, and it really didn't need a ton of work other than just cosmetic.
Yeah. So when your grandma bought it, she probably didn't realize that it had that kind of history.
Nope. We had to move out of our old neighborhood just because crime got out of control. So we moved a couple miles away up, and it was just an affordable house in a good neighborhood in Chicago. I went to Chicago Public Schools, had a great education, and I don't think she spent a ton of money. I don't even know what she paid for that house, but I would have guessed it was probably 40 or 50 back at that time.
So without knowing it, you grew up in Chicago's first designated historic home. So that must have seeped into you then. I mean, you lived in that historic neighborhood. You grew up in a historic home. You come to Grand Rapids, and there's just a smorgasbord of historic homes here. What got you excited about that?
Well, at first, I really wasn't focusing on that. I think my first flip was a 1920 Craftsman, nice house over on Prince and Fuller, right by MLK Park. Nice house, just a cosmetic. That was owned. That was a funny story. that first house we bought, it was owned by Sugar, great basketball player from Ottawa Hills and went on to Michigan State. Famous college basketball player, never got to the pros. But when I bought the house, one thing we did find in that house was he had left all of his certificates, his trophies, all of his mementos in a couple of boxes in the house. And I mean, his Gus Macker winning championship trophies that he had. I mean, he was the cream of the crop back then. He left it all. And I did finally track him down and say, Melvin McLaughlin, that's it. Melvin, I got all your stuff. You want it, don't you? Oh, yeah, I suppose I should get that stuff. Yeah, let me know. I'll drop it off to you. And it ended up, we missed a couple appointments, and he never ended up getting it. I had all this stuff. I didn't know what to do with it.
You still have all of his
I think I left a box of it there, but I didn't get all of it over to. But all I have really left, I had his sugar packets that said, Sugar, McLaughlin Sugar, and things like that, and his Gus Macker trophies. I still have one of his Gus Macker trophies. So if Sugar's listening to this podcast, all got his
he has to do
trophy.
is get in touch with you. Huh?
Yeah, that was my first house. It was 1920s era. Second house was over right outside Heritage Hill, Union and Thomas. Great old home right across the street from Gerald R. Ford home right over there. And that was a much older home, needed a lot more work, a lot more surprises, a lot less fell to the bottom line at the end of that one, but still a great home.
So that was across the street from where Gerald Ford grew up?
Yeah, a little kitty corner from it.
Okay.
On that house, his historic home on Union and right there by Thomas and Sherman area right in there.
Okay.
That was a much older home, probably 1890 home. Mm-hmm. That one had been hammered. Somebody actually started working on it before I got there and couldn't finish it, lost it. So I inherited a kind of a half-done total rehab, and it was poorly done. So I had to rip out a lot of what was already there. But, my goal was mostly just to restore anything of historical significance to the house, keep as much from the old days as possible, get the mechanical solid, refinish everything inside, probably going to be a new kitchen. I didn't spend as much as some people were spending back then on kitchen and baths, but I made them very nice because my goal was just to have a 99.9 house at the end and sell it for that. And I did probably 10 of them. I'm going to let right around 99.9 and
I mean, that's the amount you were selling them for.
Yeah, my sales price was pretty much $100,000. That was the goal. It was my model, and it worked out. It was pretty safe, so we were doing that. But I don't know if I had a real desire to do historic until I started to do a little bit more in the South Hill neighborhood, which has a lot older homes than up and down Fuller, which is where I started out basically. And then I got to meet some other investors that were very passionate about the historical homes. And that was a learning experience for me. I had always been kind of the type of guy that wanted to keep what I was doing under my hat so people didn't find out what was going on and try to mimic it, But then I started to meet people that were doing exactly what I did, but they were of the total opposite mindset where if we work together, it'll help us a lot more than trying to be secretive about, what you're doing. We work together. We help each other out. We can trade expertise. We can even sell properties back and forth to each other, and it worked out great. I ended up buying a number of homes in the South Hill area, and some of them I'm really happy I bought because they're very nice homes. Neighborhood still has a ways to go, but it's just a mile to downtown, so only a matter of time. But we had a great group of investors that we got together on the neighborhood association on the board and tried to get everybody involved in the neighborhood and fixing things up. And we got rid of a lot of problems, made a lot of improvements, and it's a much better neighborhood these days. I think that's where I really got the bug for the historical homes.
Yeah, what is it about the historic homes? Because you've gotten into them. I mean, you get into the bones and the way they're built. How are they better than the homes you might find today?
There's really no comparison. What's being built today doesn't hold a candle to anything that was that was built 100 years ago. Totally different way of doing it. There are some better things. Foundations are definitely better today. You have to really watch your foundation on these old homes that can really sink you fast. Of course, the mechanicals are going to be pretty terrible in an old home, so you're just going to replace them. You're going to have new water pipes. You're going to have new electric runs. You're going to have to fully insulate it. You know, a lot of times we do windows. A lot of times we're doing roofs. So the idea was at the end to have a rock solid house where the structure is going to be solid. You're not going to have a problem with that as long as it's not settling too bad. You're going to have fantastic amenities like pocket doors and hardwood floors and beautiful fireplaces, lots of room, 10-foot ceilings, huge windows, things that they just don't do today. Today's homes are junk. We bought a new home in the suburb of Palatine in Chicago in probably 91 or something like that. It was a brand new home that was built. It was a very modest home. But I remember after I got to see how those homes were built that I realized that if I ever got locked out of my house and I was really in the straits, all I had to do was punch a hole in the side of my house and I could get in, because it was just plastic siding, foam board, insulation, and 1/2-inch drywall. And I could punch through that without even hurting my fingers. Of course, didn't want to do that, but that's just how poorly homes are built today. They just have foam board generally on the outside with siding over that and insulation, and then drywall. And then, you might get a nice kitchen. You might get granite countertops, but everything else is going to be just bare bones builder grade materials.
So is it the detail that they brought to those older homes, or is it the materials? I mean, what is it that made them so much better?
Oh, both. I mean, the designs were certainly more extravagant. Labor was cheap. Materials. I mean, we lived in the breadbasket of hardwood, wood in this area of the country. Grand Rapids got rich by supplying Chicago all the lumber it needed after the Chicago fire. So we were in the middle of all this great lumber that was available, and these homes in Heritage Hill were just built. I mean, some homes, I swear, were built by knocking down a small oak forest for all the detail that's in some of these large mansions. So you can't even. It's always a question when you own an old home as an investment. How do you insure it? Do you insure it by replacement value, or do you insure it by actual estimated value? You couldn't do it by replacement value. You could never replace the oak in an old home built in 1890. I mean, you can't get a home with a pocket door now unless you buy the pocket door from Home Depot, which breaks in 3 years. It's just not the same any longer. Fireplaces, 10-foot ceilings. I mean, you don't get 10-foot ceilings in a home unless it's one of these nicer $400,000+ homes. So craftsmanship was, look at the designs of the homes. So much more inventive than it was, or it is today. Even if you get into a tract home, like Easttown is just a big tract home neighborhood. Every home on a block can be a 4-square, but they just have different treatments to it. And after a while, you look at one home in Easttown and you know exactly what it's going to be like. All you just got to do is see how the staircase is laid out and if it's got an addition on the back, how's it used. But they're all pretty much the same. Well-built homes, good. By that time, they'd gotten much better foundations. Foundations before 1900 always ran the risk of being pretty iffy because they're often built with fieldstone, and that's just not the same as pouring with footings. So it was both. The homes are just of an entirely different nature. You cannot build a home in the historical neighborhoods of Grand Rapids today. You just simply couldn't do it.
Now, you have done some home building. I think you said you built some.
Yeah,
some
we did.
homes.
We did one. I partnered up with another builder in the early 2000s. We did a very nice little home in Cascade, which did well on it. We did all the work ourselves. That was a real crash course for me as a builder into framing, because I had never really gotten into that before. That was my partner's area of expertise, and he was very good at it. We built a real nice home, but it just wasn't the same for me.
How did you take some of the lessons you'd learned from the historic homes you've been so familiar with to building a new home?
We put a lot of detail. We did a lot of custom trim work in those homes. You really couldn't do anything with solid flooring, solid oak flooring or anything like that. But we did do a lot of detail work with using MDF material, just buying 4x8 sheets of MDF of different sizes and such, and cutting it up to make all the trim work in the house, the casings, the window treatments. Basically, we simulated the styles of a craftsman style house using, MDF, which is so much cheaper than using hardwood. And it came up gorgeous. Then you just put in, you give it the nicer old details, some built-ins, nice windows. Make sure you don't, if you look at new homes built today, you can just tell if it's a good home or not just from the outside. How did they wrap the windows? Is it just a crummy vinyl siding wrap around it? Or does somebody take the time to build some substantial wood trim work around the outside of those windows and their eaves and their rakes and so forth? If they did, then you know what you're getting in that house. It's going to be a much better built house. But that's not how any house built under $250,000 is made.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about your business as an investor, because you acquire these properties. Are you doing any more flips, or are you strictly buy and hold at this point?
I've done 2 flips since the crash. The one I did a little too early. I did probably in 2008 or 2009. That was kind of my fill-in project for. By that time, the renovation for my own properties had ground to a halt. The banks had wanted really nothing to do with that kind of stuff anymore. It was a whole different market. It was a very scary time. And I bought one. I think they describe it as trying to catch the proverbial falling knife. I thought that the market had dropped so much that I could buy a house at a pretty good price and sell it for, I think I was even shooting for my $100,000 target price on it.
Your $99.99?
Yeah, prices had gone back down to that again. From 2003, it was by 2009, it was back down to it again. But I ended up getting a lot of contracting work that actually I was very thankful for, because it saved my butt in a hard time. And I just went back to that house and fixed it, worked on it whenever I had some spare time, which wasn't very often. So I ended up doing a lot of nights and weekends on it. Finished it up after about 1.5 years. And when it was all said and done, it ended up being a charity project. I actually think I lost $1,000 on it.
Wow. So you bought it for how much?
50, I think.
50. Put how much into it?
Probably, the budget always creeps. Probably ended up putting 30 into it. I had holding costs of 1.5 years. So property taxes on that home back then were way up because of the bubble back then. I was probably paying $2,500 in property taxes for 1.5 years or more. Holding costs. Had the darn copper stolen out of it one time while it sat there.
Yeah.
So it ended up going over budget a little bit, but I lost probably, I think when I bought it, it was supposed to be $119,000 house to sell, and it ended up being more of a $98,000. So I lost my margin on the final sale price.
Not to mention all the time you put into it.
That was a freebie. Mm-hmm. And then so I was definitely scared to death of doing another one after that. So I waited a couple of years until I definitely felt that things were down enough, and then I did another small one over by Immaculate Heart of Mary that worked out pretty good. It was
another
nice.
flip.
Another flip, yeah. And that one worked out better. But I tell you right now, with the way prices have gone up anymore, it's a great time to sell a house. But I'm just afraid of that falling knife theory again. So
it's a great time to sell a house. Is it a great time to buy a house? Is it a great time to still be flipping?
Well, it's a tough question. I just had a good friend call me up a week or so ago, said he had just bought 3 vacant parcels from the land bank in 3 different neighborhoods, and just was wondering about my thoughts on those. And so I went over and drove the neighborhoods and found out, asked him what he was thinking. My first thought was he wanted to buy vacant property and put the most economical house he could put on it. He had just gotten done with a pretty expensive investment property rehab, so he knew what the costs were going to be. And I said, I was very cautious about it myself. I would never build a new home for investment right now. You could get it. You can justify it on cash flow because rents are just so high right now, but you're not going to have any equity in it. If you're buying a house, maybe one of these properties I thought was probably the most viable was over near, say, College and Leonard, a little bit over there. So it was within striking distance of Michigan and the hospitals right over there. I mean, you could just see the hospitals looking down College from the end of his block. But it's still the neighborhood that it is, and most homes are probably going to sell at $80,000 to $120,000, and he was going to have to put $170 into it to get it be finished. Probably, maybe he could do it for $150, but that'd be about the least he could do it for.
But then you'd have the nicest and most expensive house in the neighborhood.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's just not. For me, it's a no go. And so, therefore, when my investor friends talk to me, I think I'm pretty much the proverbial wet blanket because they know what I'm going to say. I'm saying you just can't make it work at these prices as an investment property. You can make the cash flow work, but you're not going to make a lot on equity. And that's if you assume the most rosy equity price today and not what it might be in 5 years if we have another big downturn. Then you're back into that situation where you might have a $180,000 investment that you've got sitting next to a house of comparable value, less of course, but comparable, selling for pennies on your dollar, and your model just got blew up, and that's what happened in 07 and 08. It's a lot of my good friends that were investors lost everything. Lots of people.
So, do you feel that we're in a bubble situation right now?
I'm no prognosticator, but all I can say is things look very similar to how things were in terms of enthusiasm in 06 and 07. I mean, on the one hand, Grand Rapids is without a doubt one of the best places you could own an investment property business in the country. No doubt. I mean, we still have great value in our homes, but we're getting great rents. On the other hand, if you look at things like affordability, we're back to the same. I follow a lot of people in terms of economists, and if you look at say the average gross income plotted over 25 years and how that's changed over up to today, and you compare that to what the average housing cost is, it's through the roof again. People are paying multiples of 2 and 3 times what they were 10 years ago, 3 years ago. We're back to those pre-bubble areas. So it's just not sustainable. People cannot afford to pay these $1,800 2-bedroom homes unless everything is perfect. And I don't think anybody would call our current economy perfect right now. So it's just a concern to me that, I mean, if you look at, home values versus what the average salary of a person is right now, it's just gone way up again. So it's a great market, but what's keeping it up? Is it all these, low interest rate loans that are happening right now? I mean, how long can 3.5% loans go on? So if you're
what happens once those rates start going up?
I tell you, most of the people I help with buying homes, if their interest rate went from 3.5, nobody's doing adjustable rates right now. But I mean, for an investor, if your investment rate goes from 3.5 to 7 because you had to get a commercial loan from the bank that's going to balloon every 5 years, you're out of business. You can't pay. Your 7% model will not work. And that's what happened just 10 years ago. So, I just strongly counsel, make sure you just be prepared for the downside so we don't get caught. I mean, don't be over leveraged. Just have enough room to get out of anything that might come up and have some cash on hand so you can buy that $17,000 side-by-side duplex when it comes up for sale again, if it comes up for sale. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
Okay, so you're kind of keeping your powder dry at the moment.
Absolutely. I missed a lot of great opportunities. I mean, back in those days, all I was worried about was not going bankrupt. I could not afford to buy a property and fix it up. So it wasn't even a question. So different world now. Of course, market is so much better. So yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, it's hard to it's hard to have a discussion with, with people that are, I just talked to a guy 2 days ago that he's frantic to buy another home or two in the next month. He can't find them at the right price, but he's going to buy one. And what that means is he's going to overspend.
Yeah, some people set unrealistic goals like I'm going to buy 2 homes in the next 2 months to either flip or buy and hold investment. You really have to pay attention to the market and what's going on externally, because if you set those goals, you're going to force yourself to overpay. Move forward with caution.
There's lots of cranes in the sky. There's lots of rosy outlooks. There is a big shortage of housing in Grand Rapids right now, so there's a lot underpinning this market to keep it strong. Then again, rents, what they're charging for new places, $1,800 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Wow, I wish I could charge anything close to that. I don't even charge half of that, generally speaking. So hopefully we've got some room, but those are the first ones that are going to be non-viable if the market dries up again, like it did, just 10 years ago.
So the type of properties you own, I would imagine, are more for the middle economy, the people who it's more affordable to more people.
It's going to be for people that want the location and also like the elegance of a late 1800s home. Mm-hmm. It's just a different home.
What's the rent range that you would get on any of your homes?
Well, there's a couple different ways that we investors like to talk about it. A lot of us just talk about a base rent of X dollars per bedroom. That's one way of looking at it. It used to be $300 not too long ago. I think it's pretty much $400 right now.
$400 a bedroom. So if you have a 3-bedroom house, you're talking $1,200.
Yeah, and of course that gets adjusted up or down based on location, based on the quality of your house, what kind of tenant you can get, so forth and so on. But yeah, that's a good running number. If you got like one bad bedroom, then you're going to have to adjust downward. If you've got fantastic foyer, living room, dining room, pocket doors, things like that, yeah, then you can adjust up. In a nice hot street. A lot of people, I hear a lot of talk about dollars per square foot. That's becoming more of to build right now, an $1,800 apartment that I talked about, it's only going to probably have about 1,000 to 1,100 square feet, where, that's pretty similar to what I've got, but they're charging $2 a square foot. I think $1 is probably more realistic in the older homes that aren't nice and new and shiny, but it's still a better home. And it's not any farther away. So hopefully, if we're buying in the historic areas, we got a little bit more level of security if things get tough again.
Yeah, especially as the neighborhoods improve and you see more businesses going into the neighborhoods and younger families moving in. You manage your own properties, and I know that in the beginning, you kind of touched on that you were so busy flipping and putting your efforts into rehabbing the homes that you weren't paying as much attention to the management part. Can you talk about that and how your management style kind of began and how you've improved on it over the years?
Well, I've had a pretty big change in viewpoint in terms of management over the 19 years I've been doing it. When I first started, I think I was kind of the typical mindset of a landlord that why make anything too nice because your tenants are just going to bust it up. So I kind of followed that. My first few properties that I started adding, I did not put a lot into them. And therefore I got the tenant I was asking for. I got bad tenants. And I didn't have a lot of patience with bad tenants. So I had to start adjusting over the years, trying to get better tenants and being more tough about it. Any homes that I had that were in neighborhoods that I eventually couldn't justify a good tenant, I had to get rid of. And I just focused on the ones that I thought were going to be viable for people that wanted to live and work downtown. Therefore, I started putting a lot more money into them. As I said, by 2005 and 6, we were making very nice units. We were finishing them out very nice. So therefore, it was much easier to get a good, solid tenant. My rents were much higher. I was nice and close to downtown, so I could get young professionals. Don't tend to get a lot of families anymore, just because the properties, the values, the rents are just too high right now. You can't justify paying downtown prices when you're a family on a budget. So we tend to get more of the young professionals or students like that now. And, if we've basically focused on getting all the properties up so that they're going to compete all on the same level with nicer places. And, rents are quite up. So that kind of helps determine your tenant too. And I've basically, went from asking for the kind of tenant that I got, a subpar tenant that was gonna bust things up and not treat the property with respect, to now we've got tenants and just through learning things over the years, we can get, when a tenant moves out, we try to help them with some ideas on how to leave the apartment with like checklists and such. And oftentimes I'll get an apartment back that we can theoretically re-rent it again with 2 or 3 hours of work. But we don't typically do that. We'll still go in and just make sure, double clean everything. But
and you put a lot of effort into a pre-leasing strategy with your units. Can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, pre-leasing is an idea that I think when I first started using it, probably 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, it was not as prevalent as it is today. You see it a lot more with 616 or some of the other development companies, where as soon as they start to build a project, they are looking for tenants on a waiting list. So you're getting tenants that are planning to move into your place at some time in the future. I'd been actually doing that for quite some time, just because being a landlord and being kind of thrifty, we'll say that I hated vacancies. And I tend to have a lot of young people, and young people do tend to turn over every 1 year, maybe 2 years, 3 years on the longest for the most part that I found, because their life is changing so often that they're moving from one situation to another. So knowing that I'm probably going to have a fair amount of changeovers in a given rental year, I started to pre-lease, which basically means just offering mine up for a waiting list, say at the early part of the year in March and April. So I basically start asking my current tenants very nicely. I try not to push too hard, but in February or March, just asking if they might know what they might want to do for the upcoming year. If they wanted to stay with me, I'll usually offer them some kind of a incentive, like holding the rent the same, or some other way to, some sort of improvement or something like that, because it's great to have people stay. But knowing that people are going to leave, I get a lot of people that are moving on to, they've finished graduate school, they're moving on to their real job or something like that. So that apartment's going to turn over, and I start taking applications for it in March and April. And I've just found over the years that it is always much better to find a tenant that has planned their life in such a way that they're knowing they're going to be moving in 6 or 7 or 8 months, as to somebody that needs to find an apartment tomorrow because of some life event that may or may not been within their control. So I've ended up getting a like I said earlier, a good quality tenant that takes care of the apartments, respects it. They're thankful for having a nice place, and they leave it pretty darn clean. I might have to go deep cleaning some things, but everything's been removed and it's swept up and no real damage. So I can't ask for more than that.
So how far out are you pre-leasing your units? If you know a resident's going to move out, when will you start?
I don't know anything right now for next year, but if my rentals are all going to basically become available anywhere from May 1st through October 1st.
And do you intentionally schedule it that way? Like, if you adjusted your leases to fit within that window?
As much as I can. Sometimes things happen. We just had 2 tenants in the last month just buy their first homes. So, that comes up a little earlier than expected. I'm not usually one that wants to rent a house in December, but it's a 2-bedroom apartment, so that's going to be a little bit easier. But yeah, I'm going to probably try to steer that new end of lease date not to be a full year lease, but it might be 10 months or 14 months. I'll try to work with a tenant to get it to fit into my window a little better. So that way, we can get everything in the good months when most people are actually looking, because I can see right now from trying to rent this one that I just started marketing last week that I'm just not getting near the hits that I get when I place one of my normal ads in March and April. I just get deluged in March and April.
Where do you place your ads?
Craigslist.
So you've had good luck with Craigslist?
Yeah, Craigslist it's only a way to get people to look at my website. My website has all the information. We have everything arranged by neighborhood. So if you like a particular neighborhood, you go on it, pick that neighborhood's drop down, and you can see all the homes that I own in, say, South Hill or East Town or something like that. And it has virtual tours. It has floor layouts, floor plans, pictures, all the information, our leases, everything. You can basically. I would really prefer. Let's say I put a lot more faith and value in a potential tenant that has done their research ahead of time and is walking into my unit knowing exactly what it is, and they're excited about it, and they're bringing a filled out application. That's a good tenant right there.
Why don't you give us your website?
TanglewoodProperties.com. Tanglewood, Tangle, woodproperties.com.
And you're also a member of the RPOA, and you and I are both on the board. How has the RPOA helped you during this entire period?
I joined the RPOA when I think within a couple of months of buying my first rental property in, say, 99. So been a member for a long time. I've never felt that I wasn't getting my money's worth out of it every year. And I don't use it that much. I mean, by the time you've been doing this for, 18, 19 years, you don't need the hand-holding you did when it was your first property. So, but it's just a great way to meet like-minded investors and find different ideas. I mean, we should always be open to new ideas, but it's also a mutual support group. We just try to help each other be more successful at our careers, and that's the name of the game, is helping everybody to be successful at this. So, I mean, you'd rather have a good landlord owning the home next to you than a slumlord. And generally speaking, slumlords don't like to be members of the RPOA.
Well, as we wrap it up, John, I want to just ask you, do you still enjoy what you're doing? Do you still enjoy the historic homes? And why do you keep doing it?
Wow, good question. I think I'm approaching the point in my career and my life where I'm actually starting to think about the downward path into retirement. I have to say that I'm not your typical landlord. I probably do way too much myself. I do, ever since I had to really get a handle on cash flow back in the dark days, I pretty much do everything myself except mechanicals that you need for permits and such like that. So I'm going to go out and rake leaves and cut, dead plantings and stuff like that today and take it over to Budworth. So yeah, days like you're wondering, wow, what am I doing here? I could find a lot better ways to spend my time. But then again, I'm not working in the high pressure factory that I was, 20 years ago, with people coming to me in an endless line of problems that had to get solved before you walked out the door, or else you weren't walking out the door. So a lot to be said for standing out in a nice, beautiful fall day like today and raking leaves and listening to the radio or your music on the radio or whatever. And
or this podcast.
Can you listen to it over your phone? That's one thing I have not tried.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll show you how after.
Yeah, you have to show me how to do that, because that would be a great way to spend some time after you're tired of hearing the talking heads say the same thought over and over again. I enjoy it. I enjoy the freedom of it, as you'll hear a lot of landlords in the RPOA say. There's nothing better than having the freedom to decide what you want to do that day. You just need to have the motivation to go out and do what you need to do, but there's a great joy in doing that. So I do enjoy it. I am looking forward to the days when I can hand off some of my management duties to someone that can help me with that kind of stuff. So that day's coming, and I can just do what I want to do then. If I want to go rebuild a porch or do a bathroom or something like that, I can just plan on it and do it and not feel compelled to do it by, amid other things. So no, it's an enjoyable job to have. And I would suggest anybody that's always had kind of a dream about how to run their own business, it is going to be a great way in the future for anybody still to make a living outside of a regular job. So.
Well, great. Well, John, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Good luck with raking the leaves.
Thanks, Brian. Good to talk to you.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.